Welcome everyone to the V3 implementation call on July 28th. Thank you for being with us this morning. Just as a reminder, these meetings are recorded and they are published on our website and also on our YouTube channel so that you're able to go back and review either sections you missed or share them with other members of your team. Chris does a really good job in time stamping them. So when you go back in, you don't have to go through the whole meeting unless you want to. You can go to the topic of interest and the timestamp. If you click on that, it'll take you right to it. So those are available to everybody. We do encourage the V3 implementation calls to be a conversation. As we go through the topics on the agenda, if you have questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to unmute or to use the chat feature and engage in those conversations. These calls are most helpful when there's that good dialogue of questions and answers back and forth. So we look forward to a good call today. Lots on the agenda this morning. Let's go ahead and move to the agenda. All right, Laurel Baeder's gonna start us off with a maintenance update.
Hey everyone, good morning. Just wanted to provide a brief update. We completed maintenance last week on July 20th and 21st, and everything was successful and should be up and running. If you notice any issues in any of our systems, website, reports, submissions, please do not hesitate to reach out and let us know. Thanks.
Any questions for Laurel? All right. Next on the agenda, we're going to turn some time over to Lauri Bradt, and she's going to give us an update on the boot camp.
Good morning. I want to share my screen real quickly with you. And I did, as Julianne said, I wanted to give a brief overview and a little recap of our boot camp, which took place recently. And I wanted to mention first just a little bit about our focus and target audience for boot camp. And that is that we really try to focus during this time on topics and resources that target our state EMS managers. So at the request of state data managers, this training was really only made available to those who are directly involved at the state level of implementing these new changes in our new 3.5 version. There were a few vendors on the call if a state had specifically requested that a vendor represent them in the training. And we do encourage all of you to be sure to register for our annual meeting coming up next week. The focus for next week will be a much wider audience. We encourage all of our NEMSIS stakeholders to be a part of that. And the focus of our training will be different next week. I wanted to report that we had our largest ever boot camp this year with 87 people attending in person, not in person, sorry, live audience virtually. And we had 43 states and territories represented in that. And the sessions were led primarily by our NEMSIS TAC, but we did want to give a big thank you to Chip Cooper, State Data Manager from New Hampshire, who also presented. And I know his information and resources he shared was very helpful. So we thank you, Chip, for joining us in that. And then I also wanted to share just, there was a Google group email that went out last week with several helpful resources that were shared during this training that may be helpful and beneficial for all of you to have. I think Atim is going to share a link in the chat right now for that. But if you're not part of our Google group, I would encourage you to sign up for that and check out our website for some more resources as well. And then finally, I do want to give a shout out if you're not registered yet. We have, I believe, 179 registered as of yesterday. So again, more than we've had in previous years. We're looking forward to a really great turnout next week. And if you're not already registered, we encourage you to do so. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out and we'd be happy to help point you towards resources or answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauri. Any questions for Lauri? All right. Next on the agenda is Monet, and she's going to talk about some of the plans for 3.5 products.
Hello, everyone. Good morning or afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, you should be able to see the NEMSIS website. I'm actually going to go to the home page really quick. We want to talk a little bit about the transition plans for the software developers. So on the NEMSIS website, under the Using EMS Data tab, we have a tab called V3.5 Revision. And the first tab on this page says State and Vendor Transition Plans. I actually already have this document open, so let me just go ahead and open that. Let's make sure you can see that. So right now we have several software vendors who have indicated a plan for transitioning or have products available for their states. However, we do have some states that are reaching out to us and indicating that their local level vendors have not indicated when they may have products available. And you can see here that although we're not asking for a specific time frame, we're just asking for some type of indication so that we can have this information available to the states. So if you are not completely certain of that time frame, you can just indicate to be determined so that we can at least list your software company and some type of indicator on this spreadsheet here. And then for the vendors who are curious about the state plans, the first tab of this spreadsheet will provide that information for you. And then all of these plans are also included on each state website. So if you have any questions about this, let us know. We're going to reach out again to a few of the software vendors that are listed on the compliance page for the collect data products and see if we can get some responses. But it's we're certainly not going to, we're just encouraging you to supply any information that you might have at this time. Okay, I'll stop and see if there are any questions about this.
Hi, Monet. This is Kelly from Image Trend. I recently had a state data manager ask if there is a deadline for vendors to get compliance. I wasn't aware of a deadline, but just wanted to confirm.
Yeah, we can't set a timeline for compliance, but I do have our Mr. Chaney from NHTSA on the call and Laurel Baeder also, and even Julianne. Do either of you want to take that question?
Well, I can speak to that a little bit. Monet, I would just echo what you said. We cannot control vendors' timelines. If a vendor decided not to become 3.5 compliant, then that's entirely up to them, and we can't enforce a date by which they must become 3.5 compliant. The only punishment that we can offer is that if you don't complete the testing, you will not be compliant. So to that end, Kelly, it's entirely whatever timeline Image Trend has selected, and the same for all other vendors. We're of course grateful to everyone who has come early to test, and we're happy to work with people whenever they're ready to complete the testing.
Okay, that totally answered my question. Thank you. I appreciate it, Laurel. And Monet.
Kelly, the second phase of that is from NHTSA, and again, we don't have the ability to put that requirement on anyone, and I think the only ramification I can think of would be if a vendor fell out of compliance and the state required compliance for them to function in that state, then they would be subject to whatever the state would decide to do. But that's not something that the Fed or our office is going to have any say in.
Okay, that answers my question, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
We've got a couple of questions in chat. Anne from Arizona. We didn't put on there when states will stop accepting 3.4. The sunset date for 3.4 is January 2023. So until that time, NEMSIS and the states, anybody can accept 3.4 data along with the 3.5 data. Will support both of those versions at the TAC. And then let's see, Benny, any data on when each state will allow 3.5 testing? So not all states will do testing on their internal products. So you'll just need to connect with your state and see what the process is that they would like to go through for 3.5 compliant state level products.
And this is Josh. On this spreadsheet, I wonder if it'd be helpful to indicate those that are already certified compliant. Digitech and Zoll would be a couple examples.
Yes, yeah, that's a good idea, Josh. There are several that already have, several vendors that already have a 3.5 compliant product. And Monet, would you bring up that, actually I can, since you stopped sharing and that would be awesome. Yep, if you go to technical resources, compliance, and then on the compliance page, you have the toggle to be able to choose 3.4 or 3.5, and then it'll show you the vendors, the receive and process and the collect data vendors that already have a 3.5 compliant product. And then Monet, I've got one more question. Would you go back to the spreadsheet that you were sharing for the states and show the states one more time?
Where's my tab? Sorry, give me 1 second here.
And then just go down a little bit. Yep. And this is, this spreadsheet is available on the website. Maybe Monet or Lauri could put a link in the chat so that you can see those. And testing for 3.5 compliance is in process with the TAC. So if you have a product that, if you're a vendor and you have a software product that you've developed for 3.5, you just reach out to Laurel, Baeder or Atim Effiong and set up that compliance testing for your 3.5 product. That is available. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, this is Karen. I have one.
Yeah.
When were those questions asked about the state, tentative timeline for version 3, and when do you plan to provide a second survey?
Questions and surveys went out a few months ago, and we're inviting states to update their information at any time. So we haven't set a time for a new survey. We just have been inviting states to update their information along with vendors, and we will update that spreadsheet on the website as we get new information from states and vendors.
Thanks, Julianne.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next item on the agenda is a discussion about the sunset date for 3.4. We had a couple of state data managers want us to bring this up and have this conversation on a V3 call. So we've added it to the agenda. I'm showing on the screen right now the NEMSIS version lifespan, where it shows 334 and then the 340 release to closure. 340 will have been open for almost 8 years as we plan to sunset acceptance for 3.4 data, January of 2023. But we would love to, we'd love to hear your feedback and comments. I know there was some concern about that January 2023 date. So it's a great opportunity for you to bring up your questions or concerns about that sunset. I'm going to put in the chat the link to this page.
I'll ask the question, Julianne, that I'm sure everybody wants to. So this is Karen Jacobson.
Sure.
So knowing that best case scenario, states start allowing submissions in the first quarter of 2022. How realistic is it for you to expect that states will be able to have even 50% switch over by the close of 2022, making January 2023 a realistic option for NEMSIS to say we're no longer going to accept that standard? What's your concern on losing data?
It's a great question. Thank you, Karen. We hope to not lose any data. As we transition from versions, we do provide mapping that's available for those translations for those states that just are not able to make that full implementation. And so we've done, Josh Leichler has done some great work developing the mapping translation for 3.4 to 3.5 and also back again from 3.5 to 3.4. So ideally, we would love to not lose any data, and we'll do everything that we can to support states in being able to implement that new version, and if necessary, to be able to map data into the new version until they're able to update that.
Yeah, and this is Josh. The one issue though with the 3.4 to 3.5 translation is that it will generate an invalid 3.5 file because it can't generate the UUIDs on the fly. So that it won't be an option to up translate. It would be an option for an agency that's switched to 3.5 to translate down to 3.4 to send to a state that's not ready for 3.5 yet. But national data coming into the national database, it will have had to be collected in 3.5 in order to be sent to the national database.
Thank you, Josh. Thanks for pointing that out. Are there other states that are concerned about implementing 3.5 over the next year and a half?
Hey, Julianne, this is Tom from California.
Hi, Tom.
Hi. So yeah, there's just not any way in the world we're going to be able to make that. I know that we have put up loosely first quarter of 2023, but given everything that's gone on and is still going on, the ability to provide the attention that the movement to 3.5 is requiring is just simply not been able to take place. I suspect that we'll be largely very late into 2023 unless something really odd happens or something changes. The roughly 18 months that I'm going to say that states have lost, if you will, since COVID started to now, is going to really be an issue in some places. Maybe, in only a handful, maybe in all. But this time frame is quite concerning, and I have heard from a couple of state directors who are very interested in seeing, what the opportunity is with this time frame. So I think that there will probably be a few other conversations that end up taking place. But yeah, at least for my specific state, this time frame is very concerning.
Thank you. And that's what we'd like to hear. We have only heard from a couple of states that there is a concern. So we'd love to hear from other states, that it's an issue or a concern for more than just one or two states.
Hey, Julianne, this is Cassie from Georgia.
Hi, Cassie.
I can agree with Tom on that. My main issue is we don't want to see the same thing happen that happened with 3.4. We want to give our agencies and our vendors time to transition to 3.5 seamlessly. And I might be misspeaking here, but I think I speak for the mass majority of all of us. The struggles and the challenges that the pandemic brought and is still bringing, we don't want to bombard or overwhelm anyone with transitioning in a short amount of time. So I think that's the biggest struggle that we're all facing at this point, is making sure that everybody's on the same page and getting to that point.
Thank you, Cassie. I appreciate that. Xana, I see your note in chat as well that Oklahoma is concerned.
This is Anne. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone said. I think because of our experience with moving from 2 to 3, my other concern is not having the states at this point. I still feel like we're going to need to make 3.5 available as soon as possible, which is a different thing than sunsetting 3.4.
Mm-hmm.
Almost two different things, because I definitely have agencies that want to move to 3.5. I know that sounds crazy, but if you're transitioning vendors, or if you're lining up your technology with some of the new features, they're already making their plans based on that. And I know what's going to happen is what happened last time. We'll have agencies on a different version when we're not able to accept the new version, which also becomes kind of an issue. So just speaking for my own state, I would love to be able to open up 3.5. I wouldn't mind if 3.4 was sunsetted later. And the only downside I can see is it'll make our data, because we would accept both then for quite a while, really difficult to actually do anything with in some cases because of the changes in things like e-disposition.12. But like Tom said, I mean, it's just been a weird time. It's not something that anybody could have easily planned to have happen, especially for something like this. So I wouldn't want the vendors to lose their momentum in being available through 3.5, because I'm sure some states will still want to move there. And some states move everybody at once and don't gradually transition people. But I don't really think that outweighs the advantage of possibly moving out 3.4 for the states that need it, in my opinion. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Ridgely. I agree with everything everybody else has said on this. And we literally are just getting our last service onto 3.4. So turning around and, shoving 3.5 down their throats within a year just doesn't seem doable. And all the other things about COVID and everything else. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ridgely.
This is Eric in Ohio. I can agree with everything everybody else has said. And while we've already started putting in our statement of work and justification for the move forward, and I personally want to get it done as soon as possible, because I know how long it takes once the process starts. My concern is actually getting our agencies to actually to move over. Since we have no control over what vendors our agencies use. So I know that we're going to actually end up probably having a bit of a drop off in the number of agencies that we have participating when we make the move. So the longer we have to roll this out, or the longer we have to continue to accept 3.4 and nudge them forward into 3.5, the better our reporting numbers are going to be. So I hate kicking the can down the road, because otherwise we'll never get it moved over, and I recognize that. And so, it's that balance between keeping the momentum moving forward, but yet not losing participation along the way. So good luck. We'll do what we can as a state to move our people forward, and we already have some kind of plan, a bit of a plan on how we're going to do it. But obviously, first we have to get our own system done, and I already expect we're going to have a little bit of conversion fatigue, because we just moved all of our agencies off of another vendor and into the product that we just built ourselves, and became the state aggregator like last year. And so I can already hear the chiefs now, well, we just changed, and we know how they love change. So that was sarcasm. So, it's, we all have our own different set of challenges, I recognize. So yeah, maybe moving out farther, the ability to continue to accept 3.4 would not be harmful. I don't know how far though. That's my say.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric. And you also bring up that really good point of the balance of keeping the data standard current and applicable to the needs of the EMS industry. So it's a difficult balance in being able to stay agile enough with the data standard so that we can reflect all of those changes in the medical industry without it being very difficult for agencies and states. And it's a really tough balance to strike.
Because the longer that we continue to collect both, the harder it's going to, as one of my peers said, the harder it's going to be for us to try to make sense of our data and report it out.
And that's true.
When the state is still collecting in both versions and trying to make sense of it when somebody asks for a particular data within a particular year, and you have a mismatch of both versions. So.
Yep, yeah. That's another really good point. And I see in chat, Lance with South Dakota and Felicia with Utah have concerns about that sunset date as well. And this is exactly the conversation that we needed to have. We needed to be able to hear from more than just one or two states, your concerns, what you're anticipating the need for being able to implement a new version in your state. So it's really helpful to us if we can hear that perspective from multiple states.
So Julianne, this is Sharon in Nebraska, and I'm looking at one of your other schedules that you have posted on the site, which is your NEMSIS versioning schedule. And it has on that schedule that 3.5.0 will have broad market availability of software in August of 2021, which is about a week away. And I don't know, broad market availability is kind of a subjective term, but right now there are 3 software companies that have been approved that would be an option for states to collect the data. So I don't know if 3 is what you consider broad market availability, but just wanted to kind of point that time out on your line, if it's even realistic.
Well, and that's an extension as well as from our original planning for 3.5. And like you said, Sharon, that's a subjective statement and a goal for what we'd love vendors to be able to provide to the states and the agencies. But as we've brought up before, the vendor products, they each are taking their time to figure out their best market availability for their products as well. So you're absolutely right. It's a subjective term, and broad availability may not be the best word for 3 state vendors, but that is a marker that all we can do is encourage, and we don't control. And Amber in chat brings up a great point. She's supportive of your statement, Sharon, that the states need the ability to create documents, forms, schematron in the new versions. Cassie, for states that require NEMSIS compliance, not much of an option, and those states cannot move forward until the vendors are compliant. And that's, yep. And billers, John Becker brings up a great point. Billers on board, being able to accept the 3.5 data. Yep. There's a lot of complexities to initiating and implementing that 3.5 standard, and we'd recognize that. Are there other issues between the so we've got two issues on the table right now, that implementing 3.5 and then the sunset of 3.4. Are there any other state concerns with sunsetting 3.4? Okay. As if there's other issues that come to mind, other concerns that you want to make sure that we're aware of on a national level, as we try and make the best decisions for the scope across all 50 states and territories, please let us know. Reach out, communicate with us, and we really rely on your input and feedback for these to be able to make good decisions that are good for everyone. All right, if there are no other questions, I'm going to stop sharing. Next on the agenda is we have Danielle Boyd with CSTE with us this morning, and Lauri's going to share some slides, and Danielle's going to visit with us a little bit about the non-fatal opioid overdose.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. And while Lauri's bringing up the slides here, I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of a background about why I'm here. Usually public health doesn't join these calls, as you guys can imagine. So the Council of State and Territorial Epidemiologists is a public health body representing the data managers and the epidemiologists in health departments throughout the country. And we, over the last year and a half, started a project that was raised by many of our members, that they wanted to have a better way to understand how to collect information about non-fatal opioid overdoses that were happening in their jurisdictions. And it took us very little time to figure out that there's 50 different ways that people are doing it, and they're all trying to get the best information with what they have access to when it comes to using their EMS data. So we convened an advisory group of 30 people and worked with our EMS partners. You'll see on the slide here, I've worked extensively with the NEMSIS TAC and with NSIMSO on this project, as well as including some state and local participants to really understand what's happening, not just what sounds good on paper. And so we set out with the mission to really create a framework. So getting back to standards, making sure that people had a standard way to collect data for the number of non-fatal opioid overdoses in their jurisdiction using EMS data. And so the 2 products that we've put together over the last year and a half include some guidance on making those case ascertainments, and then understanding some recommendations on how people can do this a little bit better. And Lauri, I'll have you advance. The first thing that we did was to create a standard guidance here. And so here is a look at the standard guidance. This isn't available yet for people to use the full guidance. I wanted to come on today and let you guys see what it looks like, let you guys know what components are included in this guidance. I think as we roll it out for the public health side, you guys on this call are going to be receiving a lot more calls from your public health partners who may not already have a relationship with you, or if they already have a relationship, they'll have some specific questions about how they can access these particular data points or data elements, and how they can continue to use a standard guidance like this in their practice. And so we wanted to make sure that you knew what we were doing and the guidance that we're putting forth before you started getting a bunch of emails from your partners in public health. So as you guys can see, we've allowed a little bit more of an expanded view of the components for this definition. It's not either or, it's having a number of these types of data elements. So either the provider's primary impression or secondary impression that includes an opioid overdose term or some kind of relation there, primary symptom or other associated symptoms. Again, we will also allow medication administered if it's naloxone or Narcan, and response to medication administered is improved. And then we would also include, yes, so there is a secondary part of this definition that gives a lot more definitions of which keywords are being used. So the expanded version of this case definition here will include some of the keywords here. This is just an overview of the components here. And I wanted to pause on this last component here, the patient care narrative, or the patient care report narrative. As you guys know, this isn't reported to NEMSIS. So the definition that we're putting forward may not be able to be applied with NEMSIS data, but it will allow states to collect information the same way from state to state. So that is one key nuance with our definition that's a little different than some of the definitions that NEMSIS TAC are putting together related to this work. And I just wanted to be clear about that. So we understand that there's going to be a little bit of discrepancy here, but we wanted to also let you see what we're asking people to do. We realize that public health in general deals with the back-end data, and some of the strong points with this definition are really going to require some nuances and some better standardization with the front-end data. And that's where you guys come in. You guys looking at this understand that the front end and the back end, there's going to be a little bit of discrepancy, and your public health partners may not always understand those differences. I'll have you move ahead. So over the last year and a half, as we've been putting together this definition, we've tested it out in jurisdictions. We've had some EMS input as well. And we realized that the two groups just don't work together very often. And there's just a lack of knowledge between public health jurisdictions who need to use the data and EMS providers who are creating the data essentially. And so the data managers and state EMS offices usually get stuck in the middle trying to figure out how to balance these things. And so we offer some recommendations related to two of the main barriers that we noticed as we were going through this project over the last year and a half. The first barrier being insufficient access to EMS data. We understand that EMS data use agreements is no one's favorite term, and it's never fun to figure out the details of giving access. We have seen jurisdictions that run the gamut. So there are some that have full access to the vendors themselves and have their own logins with vendor data and information. And then we have other jurisdictions who simply request a set list of data elements periodically from their EMS partners. So anything in between. And we just wanted to offer some suggestions around helping create better relationships around data access. So some of that, of course, is the first thing, just creating those relationships, developing those relationships to have data agreements. And then some of our other recommendations are related to storage practices and methods for using the standard definition. You guys understand that because the definition is fairly large and inclusive, this could potentially bring in a lot of cases. So just understanding how your vendor capabilities are set up so that the storage practice can actually run the query, and that you can share the data once you've run it. Just some general considerations like that. All of these recommendations that we list in a separate document are kind of broken down for EMS state offices, EMS data managers, and for public health people. We understand that some of these recommendations will apply for just public health people so that they don't come to their EMS partners asking for the world and making unreasonable requests. And some of them are more geared towards helping our EMS friends understand a little bit more about how they might be able to leverage their relationship with their vendors, or being able to standardize some of the work that they're doing in their jurisdiction. So we just wanted to offer these recommendations here. So again, access available resources to learn more about access. So all of the recommendations related to accessing the EMS data are geared towards kind of relationship building and making sure you're structurally able to build a relationship of data sharing. The second barrier that we noticed were related to inconsistencies with EMS documentation. And a lot of that has to do with the front end and the back end. Public health in general, and going to some of the questions in the chat, some of the questions and the way that the narrative query is set up and the definition itself, most people will be looking at T codes or F codes. So we do provide some suggested T codes and F codes for people to make that query a little bit easier. But we've also noticed and are very aware that the front end may not map to the same F code or the same T code on the back end. So that's why there's an expanded list, and we offer some guidance around understanding why some of these inconsistencies happen and then how to work around them. So offering the recommendation to introduce regular evaluation or support efforts to provide documentation training, which we understand that in today's environment, offering more training is it sounds really good, but it's really difficult. And we know that, telling you guys that you need to offer more training is not always the easiest. And we understand that. So we just offered some recommendations here about how you can kind of leverage the information that you already have to help with the standardized training and helping with standardizing the way that data is entered in. Again, this is just meant to help in the end make sure that across the board in multiple states that we are able to pull data more consistently, that there's less gaps in the data that people are pulling, and eventually we can work towards having more numbers that are consistent. Right now, the numbers that people are pulling for non-fatal opioid-related overdoses are pretty inconsistent in the way that they are pulled. And so when one state is reporting, 300 cases and another state is reporting 5,000 or something like that, the numbers don't necessarily equate to the same picture. And so we're just offering, these standardized guidance that I just spoke about and these recommendations to help us move towards a scenario where there's a standard that's available for everyone to use when it comes to what type of definition they might use to pull this information, and then some recommendations on how to build that relationship so that both parties, EMS and public health, have a little bit better understanding of what each other is doing and how their roles can work together as a data partner instead of just kind of being contentious. So we really offer these as a way to move forward in sync with each other instead of working against one another. I'm going to pause here. There's a couple really good questions in the chat box here about the key words in the e-narrative may be problematic based on some of the type narrative. Yes. And so the keywords that we do offer do include some common misspellings, but we are aware that the misspellings are going to occur, and there's other ways around that. That's part of the reason why we've offered such an expanded definition, because using the narrative is one way that people are able to really comb through and see the details that they need when they're not available from the other methods. So some of the drop downs and other areas of those reports, people we've heard consistently either don't have access, so this is an access issue, or they aren't able to consistently get enough concrete information to justify calling that case a non-fatal opioid overdose. The Rhode Island definition is essentially compliant with the CST definition. CSTE, Rhode Island was pretty early in adopting this definition. So the CSTE definition uses most of the components in the Rhode Island definition. So if anyone is familiar with the way that Rhode Island has kind of set up their non-fatal opioid overdose kind of case definition, the CSTE definition is largely in line with what's laid out there. There are a couple nuanced details like the chief complaint that are not included in the CSTE definition that Rhode Island does include. But that's a good place to get started. San Diego, yes, the inconsistencies with the data mapping is a big issue. Let's see. And the data analysis, part of this is just like you're mentioning here, for the public health side of things, when it comes to the data analysis, they weren't aware of the front end inconsistencies. And so they're just pulling information blindly and not understanding the larger framework that they were pulling from. And so the way that we've structured these documents and the guidance is to offer some of that education as well. So we understand that as this is a new partnership for some jurisdictions, it's really difficult for people to fully understand what is being asked of them. So I just wanted to come on today. There's some great questions here. I'm going to leave my name in the chat box with an email. If you guys have any other questions, I'm happy to answer. You see at the bottom that the complete recommendations and the guidance will be shared in the fall. So you'll see more from me and my colleagues on future NEMSIS calls, future calls with NISMSO, and in other publications. But I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a heads up this afternoon and this morning, just to let you know that this is coming, that this is the standard that public health is going to be working towards. And as they work towards this, I'm sure they'll be reaching out to you guys for some help in this area. And there's some really good opportunities coming up as this project develops in each jurisdiction to do really good work. So with that, I will pause. If there's any other questions, like I said, feel free to reach out to me. You guys are very familiar with some of the key pain points that we've recognized throughout this project. So you guys are no stranger to this, but if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Are there any questions while we've got her? There was really good comments in the chat. I hope you're able to capture that. If not, let us know and we'll send you a copy of the chat.
Perfect, thank you. And while I have a second here, I also wanted to give a quick shout out to Josh Legler, who has done a lot of work with this group, not only providing, he's done a lot of work with you guys as well, but he has been an absolute asset for our group in this project here when it comes to testing and making sure that the definition that we put together and put out as a standard matches largely with what NEMSIS is doing. So we understand that, you know, looking at multiple definitions gets a little tricky. So we've done our part to make sure that we're not contradicting the information that's already out there. So thank you, Josh, for that. You're welcome. All right, that's it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And it's a really good segue into our next discussion. I'm going to share the screen again really quick. So we've had a couple of states contact us about how other states are documenting the leave behind naloxone kits. And we've found that there's not, that we have not seen a consistency. So I wanted to reach out and have this conversation again with states and vendors on how you are documenting the leave behind naloxone. The two codes on your screen are the two codes that states have said that they're using. either one or the other or both. The one is about the education, the 718 SNOMED code is about education, and the 373 is for dispensing a medication. And that one's more generic. It's not specific to naloxone. So if you've got a great way that you are documenting your leave behind naloxone, we would love to hear it, and we'd love to be able to share with other states. There are some custom elements in the library, but none of them, they're not specific to the leave behind kits. In one of our previous conversations, Beyond Lucid brought up that they're using custom elements to document leave behind kits. But what are others doing to capture the information of that being done on EMS calls? Mark, what do you mean by, is this not a federal program? The leave behind kits, we're just talking, we're looking at that documentation in the EPCR, how states are doing that. Shouldn't the direction come from them? Does anybody have specific instruction on how they're supposed to document those kits in the ambulance EPCR?
Chelsea from Vermont. We incorporated that into a state EMS protocol recently. And so we include in our state protocol instructions for documenting naloxone leave behind kits. But like I put in the chat, we utilize supplemental questions to capture that information.
And are the supplemental questions added to the field software as custom elements, or is it an additional method of data capture? Do you know?
I think it's just an additional method of data capture.
Okay. Sorry, I'm taking notes. Thank you, Chelsea. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and if you have questions specific to Vermont, I'm happy to provide more information if you want to follow up like offline.
Okay, thank you. And Mark, so Mark's got another question, another comment in the chat of keeping those questions local. So are states comfortable with how they're collecting that in the EPCR? Because the few states that we've heard from, we're looking for that. We're looking for that a standardized way of documenting those leave behind kits. All right, we'll move past this topic then. Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you, Mark, for your comments on that. We appreciate that. And Anne, okay, Anne in the chat would prefer a standardized way. And then states could choose not to export the data point or value if it's an issue. So as a more of a state element than a national element. All right. Thank you, everyone. Let's see what else is, what's next on our agenda. Oh, we go back to Lauri Bradt, and she's going to talk to us for a few minutes on 3.5 Education Models.
And there we go. Hello. I do want to touch on this briefly, and let me say as well that I'm hoping to kind of open a conversation here that we have a whole session dedicated to next week at our conference. So we hope to dive a little deeper into this topic then as well. But we're talking about briefly today educational modules, and this is specifically regarding the 3.5 transition, and wanted to give you a little update of things that have been progressing and moving ahead. We are working to form an educational committee. I know a few of you have reached out and expressed interest in being on that, and thank you. If anyone else is interested, we'd love to hear from you. We're working currently to really just ask questions, listen and learn, gathering feedback. We are also starting to produce some content and are taking your recommendations into consideration as we do that. And then today I want to talk a little bit too about ways that we are looking for vendors to collaborate with us in that process. First, I want to give a little feedback that was collected from EMS directors during boot camp. And we asked via poll everywhere, we asked who do they most need resources for? And the state director said they're really looking primarily for resources for agencies. Although also for state representatives and clinicians, their focus is really on supporting agencies. And then we also asked what modality of training would be most useful, and their first choice was short, specific training videos that are maybe 2 to 4 minutes long. That was favored over longer 30 to 60-minute sessions. Informational sheets were also helpful, and then continuing education modules was important as well. And then we asked them to rank of these topics, which did they feel like they needed the most support or information and training to help in the transition. And e-disposition 12 was one of the most needed areas, as well as defined lists. History of why changes were made was somewhat important, as well as e-outcomes. So that was some of the feedback we received from state directors at boot camp. And where we're asking today for collaboration from vendors specifically is that as we are working with the company Prodigy to help to create some training that will be free for all of you to access and to pass along to others to use as well. There will be continuing education credits associated with it if that's something you're needing or looking for. But we're wondering if there's vendors that would be willing to provide to Prodigy, to work with us to provide to Prodigy links to any of your trainings or specific video examples of your product being used. For example, as we look at changes that are made in 3.5 to show us what that looks like on your software, specifically what boxes they used to check, what they'll check now, what the difference may be. So screenshots, videos, whatever that may be. If there's any vendors that are interested in sharing some of what you're using, either your training or specific visuals of that, we would be very interested. So reach out to myself or anyone else on the team, and we will include you in that process. And then I want to just mention again that we will have some more time next week at our annual meeting session. And I just want to plant some seeds today and get you thinking. We would love to hear from vendors next week about what plans you have in place for support materials, what that may look like. And again, maybe how we could partner together or work with you in that, what types of materials you're making, where your focus is on those materials you may be making, and any way that we can partner or support. And we do, again, have a little more time to discuss it and get feedback next week. But if there are any immediate questions today, we do have a few minutes to chat about that. Any questions or interest initially from vendors? Okay, we'll chat about it more next week. I'll pass it back to Julianne. Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you, Lauri. Next on the agenda is Atim. Do you want to take a few minutes to talk about annual meeting?
Yes, so just a reminder, I know Lauri reminded us again at the beginning, but a reminder, the annual meeting is next week, August 3rd through the 5th, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time each of those days. For vendors, attendance is required as part of maintenance for compliance. So if you haven't had a chance to register, make sure you do that today, and I'll put the registration link in the chat. Additionally, yesterday, Lauri sent out an email to everyone who has already registered with the agenda, as well as some calendar invites for each of those days that you can put on your calendar to remind you to attend. So that is all that I have, but we're excited to have you all, and we have some really great topics and discussions lined up. So if there are any questions about registering for annual meeting, I will see if I can answer them. All right, well, we look forward to seeing you all next week at the annual meeting, and I will turn it back over to Julianne.
Thanks, Atim. Next on the agenda, any items from the Office of EMS with Eric Chaney?
Hi, good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. Just thanks for your participation. I have nothing specific. I'll save all the good stuff for next week at the annual meeting. As Atim said, I hope to see you there. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have for me, though. Thanks, Julian.
All right, thanks, Eric. Any other topics for open forum? Questions, concerns, issues that you'd like to bring forward? Caitlin, yes, absolutely.
Hey, I just want to give everybody a heads up. I'm going to put something in the chat here. This is a little jewel I found in the gigantic RX norm list of medication codes. There is a code that means others. So if you're in an awkward situation where the crew is having to make a record of a medication that somebody not in the crew gave the patient. So like if there's a first responder who's not part of your company and they have given the patient something that is not in your own pick list of approved medications that you have on board, and you need a way to say, you know, here's an other, or here's a not listed medication, and you're in part of the PCR that is not going to expose the entire gigantic RX norm list. This is going to be your list of things that are on the ambulance. This RX norm code gives you kind of a way to report that, look, this is just something other that somebody else gave the patient, and I'm just indicating that there was a complication and so on and so forth. So we've had good luck reporting this to states when we have a situation where the crew doesn't have enough information to fully answer the e-medication record. So far, we've been using this for a couple of years. Nothing is caught on fire. So I wanted to offer this to the group as maybe a solution to what is otherwise possibly a tricky problem. That's all.
Thank you, Caitlin. I appreciate that.
Caitlin, this is Karen Jacobson. Is that an RX QE code? Because I just put in an RX nav and it didn't pop up.
That's a good question. It's been a long time since I dug that up. I found it way down in the RX, in the full RX norm list. Possibly it's not being exposed by RX CUI. Maybe it's not being exposed by the UI, but it is down inside the list.
Oh, you know what? It says it's not a current concept, but I see it now. I see it. It just originally came up as not available, but looks like it's a historical code.
Okay, well, maybe I need to update us then, but there are a few other ones in the list. If you go looking through the list for the word other, there's a few cases where this concept is expressed that Look, we don't have, here's a code that says we don't have a code.
Gotcha.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that, Caitlin. Are there any other comments, questions, concerns? All right. Well, we hope to see all of you at the annual meeting next week. It's a packed agenda, lots of good discussion topics, and lots of good issues to go over. And we really appreciate your participation and willingness to talk about your concerns and issues in EMS data. So thank you so much, everyone, for being with us today. Thank you for contributing. Please reach out with any questions or concerns that you might have to myself, Clay, Eric, or any member of the TAC, and we'd be happy to address those. Thank you, and everyone have a great day.